Hello everybody, my name is Tuomas, this is Sound of Free, and in this video I'm gonna give you my thoughts on the infamous 1974 Beach Boys compilation album, Endless Summer. And why is it infamous? Well, we'll get into that in a minute. I haven't been doing reviews of the compilation albums until this day, basically, and the reason is I don't really see point in reviewing compilation albums usually. Maybe if there is something special, like super special about that compilation, well then. And in this case there is, because this is such an important album within their careers, and if you don't know, I've been doing Beach Boys album reviews for the past few years chronologically, slowly but surely, and I'm right now in 74. So last review that I did was Holland. And this album, this compilation was such an important, surprisingly, such an important, sort of like a turning point for their careers. So I just cannot skip it. I'm not gonna give you my thoughts on the songs itself, because obviously we all know the songs, they are the biggest hits. This album consists of their classic material from the early to mid-60s, right up until Summer Days and Summer Nights. I'm not actually really sure why they didn't include any tracks from Pet Sounds, whose decision that was, even though thematically wise it completely fits for obvious reasons. But anyway, let's dive into the sort of the little backstory behind this, and then well, the most interesting part probably is gonna be the speculation part at the end of this video about the what ifs and the you know, all that stuff, because this is infamous for a reason. So we'll talk a little bit about those reasons at the end, but also the cover art, which I have many things to say and ask about from you guys. But yeah, like the little backstory behind this one is pretty simple. Basically Capitol was trying to capitalize after the success of the George Lucas movie American Graffiti. If you haven't seen that movie, it's actually amazing. It was a little independent film nobody believed in. The studio didn't believe in it, they didn't want to release it, and it's about this nostalgia of the early 60s, basically like these innocent times of George Lucas's not childhood, but like what's that word, like teenage years, about that driving culture and that early, maybe not early, but like that start of the rock and roll group period before British invasion, basically. So Beach Boys are just starting out. They have released Surfing Safari, and yeah, so it's very cool, sort of groundbreaking film in a lot of ways. But surprisingly, it turned out to be a smash hit, not just in the States but all over the world. And yeah, it plays a few Beach Boys tracks, mainly Surfing Safari, and at the end credits Awesome Along from Awesome Along album. So Capitol realized that hey, there might be actually a market right now for a new Beach Boys compilation album, and they were gonna release this as it is, but with a title called Best of the Beach Boys Volume 4 or something like that. And somehow Mike got a note of that. They weren't doing, around this time, they weren't doing work with Capitol, because Beach Boys were on another label at this point already, and they had burned their bridges with Capitol. But somehow Mike got a sort of note about this, probably the whole group did, but Mike was the only one that cared, and he called them and was like, hey, maybe we should call it something else, and he came up with the title Endless Summer. And sometimes this album has actually been called Mike Love's concept album, so you know, there you go. But anyway, Mike Love just came up with the name of the album, and that, yeah, anyway, funny story. But that's pretty much it. Like, there's nothing that special about the backstory of this one. It's just a basic compilation album, and that's really it. Anyway, for the surprise of the Beach Boys at least, this actually was a smash hit. It sold like crazy all over the world, and what it did for their career was that it's, well, their concerts skyrocketed, and obviously the sales of this thing also affected their paychecks, and they had already gained popularity with their new music within younger groups of people like students and stuff, and in the Europe they were super famous already anyway before this one too, because of their late 60s and early 70s music. And so they had gained momentum, I should say, maybe. But when this came out, it was just the right time, because it was culturally and also for the group, it was just the right time to sort of cash in with that early 60s nostalgia. And people had sort of forgotten their music because the catalog was kind of out of print for a while, and you just didn't really hear those songs that often, and so much had happened in the music world. And in the mid-70s, people sort of realized that, hey, the Beach Boys music was kind of timeless, and new generations with this album sort of had a new chance of discovering their music. Because if you didn't know, if you are a younger guy like me, back then there was no streaming platforms. So what you heard in the radio was it, or what your parents maybe had in their record shelf, but that was it. Like when you saw this one as a new release in a shop, you didn't even necessarily know that it was a compilation album, because it doesn't look like a compilation album, and you didn't necessarily even know that they were old songs, because for you heard them maybe the first time when you got this album, and you thought that they were new songs. And I cannot deny or I cannot even imagine how that must have felt like for those fans, those young fans who discovered it with this album, because a lot of people have read the stories, a lot of people actually, thought that it was a new studio album, it was new songs, and the amount of classics that this album has, it's all killer. So, that feeling of discovering music like that within like just one album, filled with classics, must have been like overwhelming, so overwhelming. Because nobody releases studio albums with a track listing this great, really. Like, well, maybe Pet Sounds or something, but like nobody really. It's crazy. Anyway, it was pretty genius move to sort of disguise this as a sort of new studio album in a way. So anyway, I think that's pretty much it of the sort of the backstory. So anyway, I'm gonna review the album cover, and I also have a few questions for you about it. First of all, I'm not really sure what I think about it. In a sense, I think this cover is classic. Like, I love this font and the colors. It reminds me of Smiley Smile, which is one of my favorite album covers of all time. And there is something, it sort of precedes the 15 Big Ones Love You creepiness of the Beach Boys. Hey, little tomboy over there. Like, come on. Okay, so I have a few questions. That's gotta be Brian, right? That's Mike, and they're sort of covering his top of his head over there with the font over there. That's Al, for sure. Okay, so anyway, first of all, why is there only 3 members in the front cover? Like, that's pretty strange. But anyway, I really like this illustration. It was Kevin, I think it was Kevin or Keith McConnell who did this illustration. I think it maybe was Kevin, but I'm sure. Sorry if I'm misremembering. Anyway, McConnell was the last name. He did actually several other illustrations for the other compilation albums as well after this one, but I think this is the best that he did. But if we go to the back cover, things get kind of strange. That must be Carl. Okay, I guess that's Dennis, but it doesn't look like Dennis at all. But I guess that's like meant to be Dennis. Okay, so then we have like all the members, but this is actually a gatefold. So when we open this up, who the heck is this guy? This is like my big question about this thing. Some people have said that it's meant to be Brian, but no way. It kind of looks like a Lost Wilson brother, but what? Who is that? To me, this guy looks like a serial killer on the loose. Really, trying to disguise himself as a sort of balloon seller or something. And this is the creepiest thing ever. Who is that, and what's going on over here? Like, I don't. It is so strange, and I just don't get it. Why did they include all that other artwork? Because this cover art in itself is phenomenal, but all the other stuff, the back cover and the inside, is horrible. So I don't, I don't get it. But anyway, I had to get that out. What's your theory on who is who? Because all the people always just say like different things. Some people think that's Dennis. Some people think that's Dennis. Some people think that's Carl. And you know, some people think that this is Brian over there. Maybe some people think that that's Dennis. I don't like. Is that Charles Manson? I really don't know. It's so weird. But anyway, and he's reading Army War. Like what? Oh, okay. So anyway, how about the what ifs and missed opportunities and stuff like that? Well, what this album did was at the same time it gave them a new career. It catapulted their fandom and their stardom. Really, it made them superstars. They started to play in stadiums after the release of this one, and obviously it affected their salaries. They started to get a heck lot of money. I believe that this was sort of the start of the fall of the group, and not just artistically. It was that because the only two people really that kept their integrity of that, and you know, had that sort of expressional songwriter soul within them, were Brian and Dennis, and they kept that even after this one. But all the others sort of seem to just give up on that journey that they had started with, basically with Smiley Smile together as an sort of experimental group working together. And that's really sad, because that journey from Smiley Smile to Holland, it has some of the best music ever recorded and written. I love all those albums, and this puts an end to it. Because it was a struggle for them. Those albums didn't sell. They didn't really have that many hits in the States, which was their home, you know. So it really meant their biggest, you know, place of income. So doing all that for all those years, like 6 years, 7 years, the hard work, and sort of starting from all over again, you know, from the bottom, playing small venues and slowly building that up, and then Capitol releasing this, and then sort of the audiences, the general music buying public just going like, this is what we want. We don't want your new shit, really. Like, we want that stuff, that stuff, which is great music. I'm sure they were all happy that people loved it and found it, and new generations found it. But it must have been devastating for Carl and Al, and I'm not sure if it was devastating to Mike, but the rest of the guys, for Brian too. And Dennis, who's like, his whole career as a songwriter had been during that sort of that silent time period, that hard struggling period. So that message that it sort of gave them was like, what the heck, like, why did we even try? Why should we even continue this path? Which is so sad, because they could have continued doing those experimental albums and then carried on as a live act, playing those early hits and making the money that way. So, you know, nothing really made that impossible. It was actually it would have been a great way for them to continue, but I guess they just were tired, and maybe just how I see it anyway is that Brian and Dennis were always kind of the only true songwriters, or, you know, that had that sort of essence in their soul. So in the whole group. I know all of them wrote songs and wrote really great songs, but the way I see it, Brian and Dennis really were the only sort of that had that sort of need to write songs anyway, whether nobody listened to them or not, or bought them or whatever, So I just feel that all the rest kind of gave up, and that's really sad. Then there's also the fact that when they started to, after the success of this one, play bigger venues and gain more monetary income, drugs and alcohol and all those nasty things started to take a hold of especially the Wilsons, and we all know how that turned out. But things just got worse and worse each year, up until the death of Dennis, basically. So if you think about that time span from 74 to 83, it's just freaking 9 years. And if you think about how bad things were already for them personally and their health wise, like in 78 or so only 4 years after this one, it's really sad. And I just think that wealth and that those millions that started to pour on their laps sort of was that beginning of the end, because they really didn't know how to deal with that, even though they had already experienced that in their sort of teenage years. It all happened so fast, and it didn't go that bad, It was a short time period. They were mostly touring and stayed out of those hard drugs and stuff. Then they sort of lost their monies and stuff, and things were pretty clean for the most times for all the guys. And then sort of all the nasty stuff just started to happen after this one. The cocaine came into the picture, and all the other harder stuff too, and the drinking and everything. And it's just so sad. And who knows, maybe there are a lot of poor people who are having drug issues as well. But for me, always sort of seemed that for the Wilsons, the drug stuff was kind of like a party thing. So I don't really think they necessarily were drug addicts in a traditional sense. I'm talking kind of, this is another topic, but I just see a sort of chain reaction starting from the success of this one right until the death of Dennis, and everything that happened to Brian, and that massive touring engine that sort of kicked off around this time period, and all that stuff, and the death of that artistry. As much as I love albums like 15 Big Ones, Love You, even LA, and some of the stuff on MIU, there's no denying that there's a huge sort of gap between Holland and 15 Big Ones. Even though I could argue that the stuff that Brian worked on during the Holland time period is very much in the same vein that he would sort of continue that path on 15 Big Ones and Love You. So it's not completely out of the blue, but sort of the disappearance of that democratic integrity of creating a high quality product sort of just ceased to exist after this album, and everything is sort of just became very commercialized and machine-like. Let's just do a new album. We just gotta release something. Let's just everything just sort of went really messy after this one, and so anyway, obviously I'm super grateful for this album because it gave them a new life. It even though I wasn't alive back there, and this hasn't been ever for me in any way an important album, I never even listened to this one because I think there are so much more greater compilation albums by the Beach Boys. But I realized its importance, especially for the fans that found the group with the help of this album. So obviously it brought a lot of good to the world too, but I'm not so sure that it was more positive than negative for the group themselves. Because I think if you look at shows that they were playing before the release of this one, and that acclaim that they had gained during that sort of that 70 up until 74, the release of this one time period, they were sort of on the edge of that new wave already. So it was already happening. So I'm not really sure if this was even necessary for them to gain a new wave of popularity. But that's all just speculation. Personally, I think that maybe the biggest mistake that they did was that they didn't follow up the release of this one with a new album. It took them, 2 years to release a new album after the success of this one. And if you think about how long it took and how successful 15 Big Ones still was, it's pretty crazy. But can you imagine them dropping in a new album like Holland or Sunflower after the release of this one? What could have happened? Even just consisting of basically the outtakes of the early 70s period, they had so much in the can that they could have just dropped out a new studio album of those outtakes in the style of 2020 and blew people's minds. But that didn't happen. But what do you think about it? And if you have personal memories or stories about this time period, I know a lot of my viewers actually were fans or even became fans when this album came out. So I would love to hear your stories. So please feel free and comment, and let's continue over there. Thanks for watching. Hopefully see you soon again on the next one. Take care. Bye bye. By the way, in the last video I forgot to clip out this end part, because always after I've done the video I try to do some sort of funny pose over here with the album, and then I make the thumbnail out of that. So it was so awkward. I published the previous video and then I realized after I had published it that I actually ended up leaving that part, the rendered video, so it was so awkward. But anyway, I think nobody even watches these up until the last second. So anyway, whatever, take care, bye bye.